Hello there. My name is Toby Stock. I'm with the American Enterprise Institute, and I'm here to introduce my boss, Arthur Brooks. Arthur has an unusual background for a think tank president. He's a college dropout. He was a professional musician for a number of years, culminating in a stint on the Barcelona Symphony Orchestra. While he was playing his French horn and thinking that he was maybe a little bit bored by that, he came across a book by a man named Charles Murray and decided he wanted to do that instead, social science research. He went back to school, correspondence courses, eventually graduate school at the Rand Corporation. So he was educated at think tanks. Eventually became a faculty member at Georgia State and then Syracuse, teaching economics, social entrepreneurship, philanthropy, and eventually that led him to a visiting scholar position at AEI, where he worked on the book, was it Gross National Happiness? Gross National Happiness. Just a couple years later, January of 2009, the same time as President Obama, Arthur Brooks came to Washington as the new president of the American Enterprise Institute. It's been a great couple of years. I started at the same time, and we've had a lot of fun. But you don't want to hear any more from me. I'm going to turn it over to my boss, Arthur Brooks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a delight to be here. Thank you for coming to this session. A decent number of people can look like a small group in a big room like this, but as we say in show business, there are no small audiences, only small performers. I live in Washington, D.C. I run the American Enterprise Institute, where I've been the president for about 3 years, and I'm not from Washington. I'm actually I'm from Seattle, Washington. In Seattle, Washington, all right. Which is to say that all of the freedom-loving people from Seattle are now not in Seattle, between you and me. I grew up in a liberal household of artists and musicians and academics in Seattle. You might wonder how I came to my ideology. My brother's theory is that I was dropped on my head a lot as a kid. And my mother figured out that something was up with the way that I think sometime in my mid-20s. And at one point we were having a conversation. Sometime in my mid-20s, I was visiting for Christmas, and my mother said, I have a personal question to ask you. And I said, what is it? I thought it was going to be something. That's a terrible conversation with your mother. I have a personal question to ask you. She said, have you been voting for Republicans? It gives you a little bit of an idea where I'm coming from. But I'm not from Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a very tough place, particularly right now. It's acrimonious and pretty chaotic right now with the fights over the budget battles and the debt ceiling and such. One of the pieces of advice that I got when I first came to Washington, D.C. is that you know your friends in Washington because they're the ones who stab you in the chest. For those of us who love freedom, we've gotten stabbed a lot in the past decade, in the chest by our friends. In 2000, 2002, 2004, 2006, boy oh boy, did we get stabbed a lot in the chest. 2004, we had Medicare Part D, the largest increase in entitlement spending in American history, passed by a Republican president. We had 55,000 earmarks signed in legislation in the Bush administration without one veto because of abusive spending. And then, of course, in 2008, things, believe it or not, took a turn for the worse. The good news is that you took to the streets because you'd had enough. When enough is enough, people turn to action, and you did. The Tea Party rebellion, of course, was a thrilling thing for me and for most of you. It took center stage in American politics, and it led to some pretty great things. It led to November 2nd, 2010, which was an exciting night for me. I suspect it was for you too, when Republicans gained 63 seats in the House, 680 legislative seats around the country, and went from 23 governorships to 29. Now, a lot of conservatives and a lot of free market advocates were saying that night, we're winning again. Nothing can stop us. Free enterprise is back. But, if you have any friends who are leftists and they're smart, and you get a couple beers into them, they'll say, you're not winning. You guys are losing. You've been losing for a long time. And I don't like to hear it, but you know what? I got the data, and they don't look so good for us. Let me give you an example. In 1913, government as a percentage of GDP, and by that I mean state, federal, and local government spending all together as a percentage of GDP was 8%. By 1940, at the end of the New Deal reforms, which was a huge run-up in government, the percentage of GDP dedicated to government was 15%. By 1980, when Ronald Reagan became president, it was 30%. By the time he left the White House, it was 32%. When George W. Bush left the White House, it was 33%. Today, it's 36%. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis of the Department of Commerce, in other words, the Obama administration, that will be 50% by the year 2038. 1/2 of everything this country produces will be laundered through the government by the year 2038. 1970, our debt was 40% of GDP. Today, it's 100% of GDP. By the year 2030, it will be 200% of GDP. That comes from the Congressional Budget Office. That's not made up by some right-wing think tank. My friends, this is the road to serfdom. That's what it looks like. I'm not making these numbers up. We know we're going into hock. We know that the growth of government is going one way and not coming back. We can celebrate all we want, these great victories for the Tea Party and for conservative Republicans who said they're going to turn things around, but that was just a good start. That wasn't a permanent victory. It's not even a flesh wound as far as the statists are concerned. They think it's going to be a flash in the pan. They think you're going to forget. They think you'll become complacent and we'll go back to the status quo. You know, this is kind of a paradox in American politics, I have to say. And you know, here's what's puzzling. When you ask Americans what they don't want that. The Pew Research Center last year asked a large group of Americans, do you believe the free market system is the best system for America's economy, despite severe ups and downs? You know what they said? 70% said yes. 70% think that the free market economy is best. Resurgent Republic asked, do you prefer larger government with more services and higher taxes, or less government with fewer services for you and lower taxes? 69% said they wanted less government and lower services even to them. 7 out of 10 Americans wants free enterprise, but the government grows, and it grows and grows. It's like nothing can stop it. Now, guys like me, I mean, I'm a professional economist, have been screaming about the economics of this stuff for decades. For decades, during the Reagan administration when it didn't stop, during the Bush administration when it didn't stop, let alone the Democratic administrations when it accelerated, we've been saying we're going to the edge of a cliff. We can't sustain this. You're taking away our economic liberties through over-regulation. You're spending too much of our money. You're taking away the entrepreneurial spirit of this country. You're robbing our future. But we did it all in economic terms. It's time for a better strategy. It's time for a different kind of language. It's time for economists like me and people who care about freedom like you to stop talking just about economic efficiency, and it's time for us to start talking about the morality of what's going on. Now, we don't like to talk about morality very much because it reminds us of the 90s when we were in the culture wars of God, guns, gays, and abortions. We don't want to go back to those days because they were very divisive, and a lot of people who are in the freedom movement feel very uncomfortable with that language. But it's not historic that we should be uncomfortable with the language of morality. Our founders were very comfortable talking about morality, and morality when it came to freedom. 1,000 times you've heard about our unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, here's something you probably don't know. That language was taken from the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which was written 30 days earlier by George Mason. And the Virginia Declaration of Rights didn't talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That document talked about life, liberty, and the means of acquiring and possessing